What's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're doing a list of the top 10 commanders from the Legends set. Um, the reason I want to do this, I want to do this with every set, doing both the oldest and the newest set until we get most of, not all the sets finished. With the older sets, they're in blocks, so we could do the whole Ice Age block, the whole Mirrodin block, the whole Khans of Tarkir block in one video. While newer ones are set based, so we'd have to do that. But anyways, I want to do one of every single set. I think that would be fun to look at these sets, and see what commanders from these sets are the best or are the most fun. And in today's video, we're looking at Legends, which is the first set to have legendary creatures. So some facts about the set is the first set with legendary creatures. So the sets before this, Arabian Nights and Antiquities, did not have legendary creatures. So this is the first set that did. And all of the legendary creatures in this set are multicolored, which is interesting because most of them are pretty underwhelming in today's context, but there are some pretty good ones. The most popular one has 1100 decks on EDH rec, which is not very good. That's not very good. But there's some really iconic cards and iconic commanders from this set that we'll go over. And one thing I do like about the commanders in this set is that they all have like their own flavor. So that's pretty cool. There are a lot of vanilla commanders in this set, so commanders that don't have any abilities, which we don't really see often past this set. But there are also a lot of good commanders too. Some of the non-commander cards from this set, like Mana Drain, Sylvan Library, Land Tax, and Tabernacle, see tons of play in EDH. And, we have a set with a lot of really powerful cards. Mana Drain is probably one of the best counter spells ever printed. Sylvan Library and Green Deck lets you basically look at the top 3 and draw whichever one you want, or you can draw up to 3 extra cards. That's pretty strong. Land Tax is less strong, and Tabernacle is pretty niche, but in situations where someone has a big board of creatures, a Tabernacle can easily shut them down. Anyways, we're going to talk about some honorable mentions for the commanders. This one only has 56 decks on EDH rec, but this is one of the more interesting commanders from the set. It's Axelrod Gunnarsson. He is 4 double black, double red, so that's 8 mana in total for a 5/5. It has Trample, and each time a creature is placed in the graveyard during a turn which is damaged it, this is old wording, so anytime a creature damaged by this dies, you gain 1 life and it deals 1 damage to target player. So the idea of this deck is that you give the commander Death Touch, and then you give it some ability to ping. So with Gorgon's Head, you can give it Death Touch, for instance. There's also some other spells that give it Death Touch. And then you can cast Burning Anger on Axelrod, have it tap to deal damage equal to its power to any target to kill the target, and then you'll gain 1 life and deal 1 damage to target player. So it's it's not that great in that situation, but with cards like Chandra's Ignition and Arc Bond, it can really get strong. So Chandra's Ignition is 5 mana for a sorcery. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature. So this is a 5/5. So with Chandra's Ignition, Axelrod is going to be dealing 5 damage to each creature and each other creature and each opponent. So if you give it Death Touch, it can kill all of the other creatures, and that'll gain you lots of life and deal damage to players, which is going to be pretty good. Or if a player has 20 tokens out, give this Death Touch, use Chandra's Ignition, kill the tokens, hit someone for 20, that's going to be a pretty strong play. Solkanar the Swamp King, this is probably the best of the honorable mentions. It is still in D tier, but it's a 2 red, black, blue, so that's Grixis. Red, black, blue is Grixis. It has Swamp Walk, and its controller gains 1 life each time a black spell is cast. Anytime anyone casts a black spell, you gain 1 life. So the Swamp Walk is actually relevant if you have something like an Urborg out. You can just get in for damage with this. So it's actually a decent Voltron option. But gaining life can be used to trigger life gain synergies like with Veto or the Marauding Blight Priest. It says whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. Stuff like that. or something like Witch of the Moors at the beginning of your end step. If you gain life this turn, which you will, most likely each opponent sacrifices a creature, and you return a creature from your graveyard to your hand, so that's a pretty good effect. But the life gain also can offset life loss from effects like Greed or Phyrexian Arena too. So this is an interesting commander. I actually like it. It's in the honorable mentions though, because I don't know how strong it is. It's kind of expensive, and the effect isn't that powerful, but there's still some synergies with it, and has some good effects. It's 410 decks. Probably should have more decks, honestly, because there are some interesting things you can do with it. Next, we have number 9, number 10. Number 10. We have number 10 to start off with. Our honorable mentions are done. We have Chromium. It has 189 decks on EDH Rec. It's still a D tier commander. So this is 2 double black, double blue, double white. So 2 and double Esper, I guess. For 7/7, flying and Rampage 2. You pay Esper during your upkeep or it's buried. So I like this because it's a decent win con for an Esper control deck. So you play like your counter spells, you play your Swords of Plowshares, your Tutors, all that stuff, and Esper control deck, and you play a Chromium, and only 3 swings, and your opponent's dead. Pretty good win con for a Esper control deck. Its Rampage 2 gives you buffs whenever a creature blocks. So whenever a creature blocks, you get +2/+2. It doesn't have trample, sadly, but it gets bigger whenever a creature blocks. So if you have something like Nemesis Mask, all creatures able to block a equipped creature do so. You can swing in, make a lot of creatures block, take them out. Not a great strategy, but it's whatever. And then the best thing you can do with this deck, though, is play like an Esper Dragon strategy. Stuff like Dragon Lord Ojutai in it, Silumgar in it. Pretty decent strategy. This is number 10 for a reason. I put it on the top 10 list because it is one of the original Elder Dragons. So you gotta pay a little respect to that. But I think it's the weakest of the Elder Dragons. And honestly, there's so many more cards to play. That would be a Esper Control win con. But if you want to play some classic EDH, Chromium, there's ways to build it. Number 9 is Palladia-Moors. So first of all, Naya is a really good color for Dragon Tribal. And Palladia-Moors is a much better Voltron commander than Chromium, because green and red are just better colors for that. 2 double white, 2 green, and 2 red, flying and trample. The trample's the big one, so you can buff this power, and you can get over blockers, so that's pretty good. 7/7. You play like Tarko World Render. Whenever a dragon you control attacks against Double Strike, get Palladia-Moors Double Strike. That's pretty good. Two-handed axe gives it double strike. It also can double its power, so that's pretty sweet. And then something like Hunter's Insight's a really good card for this deck. You can choose target creature you control whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker's turn. Draw that many cards. And you just draw up to 7 cards. That's pretty sweet. So yeah, Naya is a really good color for Dragon Tribals. You have Palladia-Moors in the head of a Dragon Tribal deck, or because it does have flying and it does have trample, it is actually a decent Voltron threat. It doesn't really have any other effects that make it good in Voltron, but the trample is a powerful effect. It has evasion, and then of course, if your opponent has flying blockers, it does get through them. So it's decent for Voltron. It has 109 decks. It's still a D tier commander. Number 8, Vaevictus Asmadi has 242 decks. This is a black, red, green. So this is a Jund Elder Dragon. So you can play Jund Dragon Tribal. You get the best red green stuff. You get stuff like Rivis of the Claw. It's pretty sweet. Its ability is it has black gain +1/+0, red gain +1/+0, or green gain +1/+0. So it has fire breathing. So what I like about this is that you can attack and then pump all your mana into it to kill your opponent. It does have evasion, so if your opponent doesn't have any flying blockers, they can take 21 commander damage and just lose in one turn. It's pretty sweet. And of course, this combined with Tarka World Render, can give it double strike, and with its buff, it's going to be pretty big damage. You can cast this from your graveyard with Rivis of the Claw, and then something like Dragon Shadow can give it fear so it can't be blocked. It's pretty sweet. So Jund, you can either play Jund Dragon Tribal, or you can have this as a head of a Voltron deck. Interesting strategies for this. Still D tier though. Number 7 is Arcades Sabboth. So this is a very different deck than the other Elder Dragons. The 3 that we talked about, I feel like were either Dragon decks or Voltron decks. This is a very different deck. It has 150 decks. I still think it's D tier. It's Bant, so 2 double white, double green, double blue flying. You can pay white to get +1 or +0, +1 until end of turn. Your untapped creatures gain +0, +2, but attacking creatures don't get this bonus, which is sad. So I thought about this as a commander and a toughness matters or wall tribal deck. So if you have this and something like High Alert, each creature you control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. You can play something like a Charix or an Axebane Guardian or a Wall of Roots and have it be a pretty big creature for its size. So yeah, as a commander in a toughness matters deck, I think is a decent option. However, the other Arcades Sabboth, the one that's newer, that draws you a card whenever a wall enters, is just so much better. But if you want to go classic with it, this is not a bad option. Number 6, we actually have a decent commander this time. It's a C tier. We have Dakkon Blackblade, 2 in an Esper, or 2. It's weird. It's 1 black, 2 blue, and 1 white. Weird. But its stars below are equal to the number of lands you control. So it has power and toughness each equal to the number of lands you control. So it's a really simple and cool ability that scales well with the game. So I thought of this as a Voltron commander. So you play it on turn 5 as a 5/5. But as the game goes along, it's going to get bigger and bigger. So I thought that's a good idea. It is a weird color for getting lands, but there are some ways to get lands. There is sort of the Animist, Burnished Heart, Walking Atlas, Wayfarer's Bauble. Tons of ways to get lands from your deck into play with an Esper commander. Burnished Heart's one that gets 2 basic lands into play. Wayfarer's Bauble gets 1. And these will increase the power of Dakkon Blackblade. Sword of Forge and Frontier lets you play additional lands and then play cards on the top of your deck. And if they're lands, they grow to Dakkon Blackblade. That's pretty sweet. So there's ways to get lands into play in Esper. Of course, if this were a green commander, it'd be insanely good. But being an Esper, it's a little weaker. Herald of Leshrac is an interesting card for this deck. It's a 7 mana. Flying 2/4, but has cumulative upkeep, gain control of a land you don't control. So every turn you can just gain control of one of your opponent's lands, and that'll grow Dakkon Blackblade and grow the Herald of Abshak or Herald of Leshrac. So that's a pretty sweet card for this deck. Yeah. So this is an interesting commander. Esper lands matter. It could work. We have so many cards that it could actually work. Next is Rubinia Soulsinger. And this is a B tier commander. We got, this was C tier, this is B tier. So this is actually a good commander. I would say that this, if you play this, I'm not going to be upset at you. The other ones, I'm kind of like, they're bad or they're very fringe. This one is actually a good one. 705 decks, so it is probably underplayed, actually. So 2 in a Bant. You tap to gain control of target creature. Already, that's a very strong ability. It does not tap or untap this creature, and if it becomes untapped, you lose control of this creature. However, you can choose not to untap them. So what you do is you steal opponents' creatures and then sacrifice them or make clones of them. And yeah, whatever the best creature is in play, you just gain control of it with Rubinia, and now you have the best creature in play. That's a pretty strong effect, I think. And then, of course, you can steal your opponent's creatures, and then you can be like, yeah, I'm going to just sacrifice them to an Ashnod's altar, or an altar of dementia, or a Phyrexian altar, or something like that. You can also use something like Illusionist Braces. There's another card that does the same thing. Equip it to the Rubinia. Now you get to steal 2 things because the ability is copied. That's pretty sweet. And then something like Agent of Treachery can gain control of target permanents as well. There's a lot of cards in blue that do that. But Agent of Treachery, it works really well with Rubinia's ability because at the beginning of your end step, if you control 3 or more permanents you don't own, you get to draw 3 cards. So all you do is Agent of Treachery comes in and steals something, Rubinia comes in and steals something, and you have something else that comes in and steals something, and now you get to draw 3 cards at the beginning of your end step. Pretty sweet. Yeah, I like the idea of just stealing your opponent's things, and Rubinia is a commander that helps you do that pretty well. Number 4 is Hazezan Tamar, 579 decks. This is a very interesting commander. So, 4 and Anaya. On your next upkeep, after it is put into play, you put Star Token Sand Warriors into play, where Star is the number of lands under your control. Now, these warriors are 1/1 white, green, and red creatures. Okay. So you basically, at the beginning of your next upkeep, after this is put into place, so you got to remember that. You put a number of Sand Warriors into play equal to the number of lands you have. So you get a bunch of 1/1. However, we know that you get a bunch of 1/1s. They don't necessarily have to be 1/1s. If you have something like Divine Visitation out, they will become 4/4s. The Divine Visitation will make them 4/4s with Flying and Vigilance. So if you have that out and you make a bunch of 1/1s, they're now 4/4s. Something like Parallel Lives, you get to put in twice that many tokens instead. And of course, you get all these tokens. You can buff them with like a Jet Mirror. You can, do all sorts of things with the tokens. The Perforos out, they come in and each of them deals 2 damage to each opponent. So you get Perforos tomorrow, you just flicker it, get a bunch of tokens. The downside is you have to wait a turn for them to come into play, which is kind of sad. And the biggest downside, why this isn't like a S tier commander, why this is a B tier commander, is that they leave when the commander leaves. So you can't flicker this and abuse it. If it dies, you lose all your tokens, no matter how big they are. So yeah, it is kind of a big downside. But if you can abuse getting those tokens into play, if you have abilities based off of that, and if you can make those tokens into actual threats, this is a decent commander. I like this guy. Number 3 is Nicol Bolas. It has 888 decks, which is interesting. Interesting number. It's a B tier commander, I think. So this is probably the strongest of the Elder Dragons. I mean, it is the strongest of the Elder Dragons. So it's 2 double blue, double black, double red for a Grixis commander. Flying. An opponent damaged by Nicol Bolas must discard entire hand. That's a pretty strong ability. So, obviously, the first thing I thought of with this card is Nicol Bolas Tribe. We just play all the Nicol Bolases in the deck. That's objectively cool. You can play Grixis Dragons deck. You have Crux of Fate. It's a pretty strong ability. But I just want to play this in sort of like a Grixis control deck. And then late in the game, just attack with Nicol Bolas, get people empty-handed, and then abuse those. You can use something like Wastenaut or Megrim to be able to get value from your opponent discarding. There's also an idea of playing this as a commander in a Grixis Wheels deck, because you make your opponent wheel, you play things like Narset to make them lose their hand, and of course Nicol Bolas, I don't care if you have 7 cards in hand, Nicol Bolas will hit you and make you discard every single one of them. So just imagine this, you play Nicol Bolas, and the next turn you play something like, I don't know, Windfall, and everybody loses their hands, and then someone you're just like, all right, I'm gonna hit you for 7. If they don't have any blockers and then they get hit for 7, it doesn't matter that they just got Windfall, because now they discard their entire hand. So that's pretty interesting effect. I like this as a commander in a Grixis Wheels because of that, and also being able to use the ability from the discards. Something like Wastenaut is going to be pretty good. And of course, it's a dragon, so you can always play Crux of Fate. You can always just play Crux of Fate and be like, oh, I still keep my commander. Number 2 is Angus Mackenzie with 863 decks. This is an A tier commander. This is actually I said B tier was commanders that are playable. This is like commanders that are like legitimately good. Like, people would play this. I think 863 is kind of underplayed for how strong this commander is. It's a Bant commander. It's a 2/2. You pay Bant and tap him so that creatures attack and block as normal, but none deal any combat damage. And then attacking creatures are still tapped. So it's basically a fog on a stick. And if you have ways to untap this, like with a Seedborn Muse or with Penman's Aura, there's a lot of ways to untap Angus Mackenzie. You can just keep on fogging all of your opponent's creatures, and in a lot of games, opponents attacking is the way that a lot of decks will win the game, whether it be a Voltron deck or a token deck. Angus Mackenzie can just shut those decks down. So the idea of this deck is you stall out the game, and then you can win with a big spell late in the game, like an Expropriate or a combo, right? Or something like a Approach to the Second Sun, where you play this and you put it 7 from the top, and then wait till you draw it, and then you win the game, right? So I like this commander. If you can build a really good Turbo Fog from this commander, that's a sweet strategy. And you know, a lot of decks, they rely on attacking you, and if you just stop them from attacking, so whoever the biggest threat is at the table, you know, whether it be an elf deck, a goblin deck, or a Voltron deck with a lot of attackers, or a pretty big creature, you can use Angus Mackenzie, stop them from attacking, and it gives you a lot of time to set up your combo, set up whatever engines you have, or possibly just win the game approach to the second time. So I like this guy. He's a good commander. The best one, arguably, you could make a case for Angus Mackenzie as the best one. The best one, I think, is Rasputin Dreamweaver. This guy is just nuts. Like, I looked at all these commanders, and I noticed that this one is just so good. It's an A tier commander, so I think this commander is legitimately good. It is a little bit expensive, 6 mana, and it's a 4/1, but its ability is cracked. So it puts 7 counters on Rasputin when brought into play. Okay, you may remove a counter to prevent 1 damage to Rasputin. Okay, or add 1 mana to your mana pool. Okay, that's very different quality of abilities, right? Like, preventing a damage, whatever, but just getting 7 mana, this comes into play and nets you 1 mana, right? That's pretty busted. So it makes him an efficient source of mana. So where's some plans that I've had? So what you do is you play Rasputin on turn whatever. You play him out, and the next turn it basically adds 7 mana, because now you get all the mana back. So let's say you have 6 mana, you play Rasputin, you untap. Now you have 13 mana. And you can cast like a Kozilek or an Ulamog or a non-Emrakul. Emrakul's 15 mana, but you can cast a big Eldrazi Titan. That's a pretty interesting ability. I like that side of Rasputin. You can also just go infinite with Rasputin. So Rasputin, you add colorless mana. You can pay 3 mana of Eldrazi Displacer to exile it and then return it to the battlefield. So you play Rasputin, has 7 counters. You take the 7 counters off. You use 3 of that mana, so you have 4 mana left over to exile Rasputin Dreamweaver and then return it. Now you put 7 more counters. You take the 7 counters out. Now you have 8 mana. Or now you have 12 mana. You use 3 of that mana, so you have 8 mana. So every time you do this, you gain 4 mana. So it goes infinite Eldrazi Displacer, making you infinite mana. And then you can use those manas to cast all of your Eldrazi Titans if you want. Very abusable flickering. Even if you have something like Deadeye Navigator or Ephemerate, it goes hard with Rasputin, because now you're just going to add tons of mana with Rasputin's ability. So yeah, just think of Rasputin as, when this enters, add 7 mana. Or just use that 7 mana next turn, right? And like, the versatility of this card is really good, because when it comes in, you can decide to add the 7 mana right away, or flicker it, or do whatever shenanigans you do, or you can just wait till next turn and basically use it as a mana rock. So it has some interesting abilities. I like this guy a lot. Definitely a very good flickering commander, and definitely should see more play than 448 decks. Anyways, this was our top 10 from Legends. I hope you liked the video. I hope you saw some cool commanders that you want to build around, and let me know what you think about the top of the list, because these are actually good commanders. Anyways, we'll see you next time with the Fallout. We'll go with, because this was the first set, we have to go to the latest set, which is going to be Fallout. We'll do a top 10 of that, and then we'll go to Ice Age block next, and then whatever the newest set before Fallout set was. But yeah, anyways, I hope you had fun. See you next time. Bye bye.